Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This video is part of the full course AWS DevOps Practitioner training. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete full course. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we will talk about the AWS EBS volumes, right? As we already familiar with this, right? The EC2 instance that we are creating to host our web application would need a volume to be attached. That volume is needed to store the data, right? So we already discussed that the EC2 instance will be created with one default volume, which is called as a root EBS volume, which is used to store the operating system related data, right? But the business related specific data that we wanted to store, I don't want to keep it in the same root volume. We need to have it in a additional EBS volume, right? And we'll see how to attach the additional EBS volumes and how to use that volume to store the data that I wanted to, right? So as part of that, let me proceed with creating one simple EC2 instance, and we will have more details about the EBS volumes today. Are we good with this, right? So I'll just go ahead and launch one EC2 instance from my AWS management console, right? So let's say I wanted to configure this server as a Apache HTTP web server. So I will be giving the name of my instance is the web server, and Amazon Linux 2023 AMI G2.micro. Let me attach the key pair, right? And let me select the existing security group, TPT11 security group that I have already. When it comes to the storage section, right, of course, you will be getting one root volume of size 8 GB by default. If you want, yes, you can increase the volume size, but usually during the practice time, at least the 8 GB is good enough, right? But you can increase the size however you want it to be, right? And you can select the type of the EBS volume that you wanted to take on, and you can see the different types here. The default type will be general purpose SSD, and the default type general purpose is part of the free tier. Let's say if you go for a provisioned IOPS, that is not part of the free tier, and that is billable, guys. So the free tier is eligible only for a general purpose, and the maximum size of the volume should be like 30 GB, right? So just go ahead and select the default. As I said already, the type will decide the two factors. One is the performance and one is the pricing, right? So usually the general purpose SSD is the pickup even in the real time as well for all of your web servers. Good. And usually if you go to this advanced tab, right, you will get more details about the EBS volumes to do a management, right? So if you go to the advanced tab, you see there are many options that you are now got it, right? So the one option that I wanted to show you here is the delete on termination. If this option is yes, that means whenever you terminate a EC2 instance, automatically the corresponding root EBS volume will also be get deleted. If you say the delete on termination is no, then whenever you terminate a EC2 instance, only the instance will be deleted, but the corresponding root volume will still be there in your region account. Got me? That's how it is. So it's up to again your requirement. Usually when you like whether you wanted to keep it as yes or no. But most likely we will go with yes only, because whenever we terminate a server, we don't need the volume to be right. So everything has to be cleaned up. But sometimes I want to terminate my server, but I need a volume because my volume is having some data, right? If that is a special scenario that you have, we can mark this option as no, so that the volumes will not be deleted, and that volume will be containing your data that you can use later as well, though the server is terminated. Make sense, guys? Because whenever I say EC2 instance, the EC2 instance is actually referring only the compute resources. What are the computing resources, right? The EC2 instance is referring only the processor and the memory requirements or memory capacity, right? The volume is not part of your EC2 terminology. The volume is a separate resource that you create and attach to your EC2 instance and use the volume in your server side. Are we good with this? Right? So that means though you terminate a server, still there is a possibility that your EBS volume will be keep retain in your account itself if you wanted to, right? Good. So here you can see the IOPS value. This is called as a input and output operations per second. This value will be deciding the performance of this volume. Like basically volume in the sense what? We can store some data and we can retrieve the data whenever you wanted to, right? Let's say if I wanted to show some images and the text in my website as an example, right? You keep all those images in the volume, that is called as a writing operation. When any user is accessing my website by going to the browser, right? That is called as the retrieve operation or read operation, because they are going to read the data from our volumes and that data is appearing in their websites, right? So how many write and the read operations can be done per second duration on your disk, that is called as a IOPS value. If it is saying 3000, in the sense the 3000 inputs or the outputs, write or read operations can be done on your volume. That is the capacity of the volume, guys, right? So the IOPS value is editable. You can see that I can go and change the value, how much performance that you are expecting, right? So this value is editable only for certain type of the EBS volumes only. For example, if you go for GP2 type of EBS volume, the IOPS is not editable. This is very standard, right? You can't change any value there, right? The default performance, whatever the AWS give you, you will get it. But if you go for like the GP3 or the provisioned IOPS, right? So this value is editable. So you can customize how much performance that you are looking for. If the IOPS value is editable, then when you are expecting the more performance, obviously the billing will be high, guys. So the AWS will know how to calculate all of these based on the settings that you are filling in here, right? The corresponding billing will be generated, the pricing, right? Good. So those are the minimum things that we need to know at this time to create a root volume for your EC2 server. Now, apart from this root EBS volume, right? If you wanted to have your own additional EBS volume to store your business related data, then you can click on add new volume, right? This is the volume number 2, right? And we need to fill up this form. The additional EBS volume you can create now, or you can create it later as well once the server is in running state. It's up to you, right? So for now, I'm not creating a additional EBS volume. I will go with only one root EBS volume, right? And I'll add the additional volume later once the server is in running state. One other thing that you can notice here, right? Whenever you are or the default root EBS volume, which is a mandatory volume to be for each EC2 instance, the volumes are actually identified using the names. Whatever the name that you see here, like /dev/xvda, this is the standard default name that is given for any root volumes of the EC2 instances, right? So technically speaking, xvda is the name of the volume, the name of the disk. But as you know, right, in Linux, everything will be having some absolute path, correct? So any file or the hard drive or anything should be having the absolute path. So all the devices, like the hardware devices, I mean to say the processor, memory, hard drive, kind of, right? All the hardware devices corresponding names will be available in the /dev location. Like all the configurations files will be in a /etc. All the users home directories will be under /home, right? Like that, all the hardware devices will be available in the /dev location. That's the default. So that's the reason your name is appearing it as /dev/xvda. This is the root volume name. Nothing new here. Like usually if you are using the Windows systems, right? Your Windows laptop is having some 500 GB hard disk, right? How do you use that hard disk, right? You just go to your Windows system and you go to the My Computer, right, somewhere, and now you see here the CDE. What these are? The C colon, whatever you see, right? That is the name of your volume partition, right? And it is telling that, hey, this is the total size of the volume. This much is free. This much is already, used. So this is the graphical user interface. It's very easy to go and start using them without worrying about what is this name and all, right? But when it comes to the Linux, the same volume that is attached, right? The volume should have some name, and that is the default name that you can see here. All the naming conventions will be like XVDA, something like this. Good. Now, let me go ahead and launch an instance first. So once the instance is launched, and let me click on the server name, and in the metadata section, if I go to the storage section here, I can see that there is one root volume is attached to this instance, the root volume name and the corresponding details. And this is the root volume name, and this is the size. And of course, it is currently in the attaching state. It takes some time to attach this volume to your server and make the server ready. Whenever a volume got created for you, each volume is getting a volume ID. You can open this volume ID in a separate tab to see more details about the volume. Or you can go to the left side navigation, go to the volume tab here under the Elastic Block Store, and can see the volumes here as well. Good. Now I'm done with from AWS side of world. Now let me logging into this instance to do something from the operating system side. Because creating a server, attaching the volume, that is something AWS responsibility, right? And that is done. After that, it's your responsibility now how you wanted to utilize this server or utilize this particular volume, right? So let me logging in as EC2 user, and let me switch to the root. So here lsblk is the command to see the list of the volumes that are currently attached to this instance. lsblk is showing that, right, xvda is the volume name. Good. The volume size is 8 GB. Good. And you can see that the volume type is disk. That means this output is representing that there is one single disk that is currently there in your server of type of size 8 GB. Right? Don't worry about the remaining entries that you see here. I'll talk about them a bit later. But for now, just focus on the first line, which says that there is one disk is currently there. Help me guys in the chat window, right? What will be the absolute path of my volume? It will be /dev/xvda, correct? You see now? So /dev/xvda, not only xvda, if you go to /dev location, in the dev location, if you do ls-l, whatever you see under the dev location, all these are actually a like the hardware devices. You see, in the dev location, you are able to see a CPU that is actually a processor, right? Something like that. And somewhere you can see like I'm not going through all the lines, whichever it makes sense for us to understand. I'm going through them. You see the xvda here, right? There should be a memory as well somewhere. So there is a NVRAM, which is right, which is like a memory. So basically all the devices will be located in this location, guys. Okay, good. So here you can see that any entry that you see here, right, the starting letter is representing it as B. You see this? So far we understood that if the starting letter is hyphen, that is a file. If the starting character is D, that is a directory. But here I'm able to see the starting character as B. Somewhere I can see that it is a SC as well. The B referring that particular device is the block device. C referring that particular device is the character device. The difference is, if this is a character device, that means when I'm trying to store the data, when I'm trying to write some data to that particular device, the data should go a character by character. For example, I wanted to store a word. Let me take this. Okay, let's say okay, so this is my data. I'm just taking some data, guys. Okay, let's say I wanted to store this data in my EC2 instance in any one of the file as an example. So if you are writing this data into a character device, then character by character the data will be get stored on that particular device. So how many iterations will be required? At each attempt, only one character will be get hand over to that device, right? So it has to go to multiple iterations to store this data character by character. If this is a block device, then all these multiple characters will be get written into the device at the same time. That means the multiple characters will be combined it into one single block. The complete block can go and write into the a particular disk. That is the block type of the device, guys. Make sense? Just to understand, because this is how, this is all we need to understand this way only. We can't go and see the actually how it is working from the device perspective, right? So all the EBS volumes that we are getting in from the AWS, those are actually a block devices. That is why the name called EBS volume, Elastic Block Store Volumes, right? And in the EBS, why I'm calling it as a E for elastic, right? That means the volume can be adjusted in size. Let's say today I got a volume with 8 GB, right? LSBLK, right? Then if I want to increase the volume size to 10 GB, 100 GB, it is possible, right? So because the AWS is giving the flexibility to increase the volume size if you want to, even after creating the volume, this is called as a elastic block store volumes. Good. Now the LSBLK shows that there is one single volume that is called as a root volume at this time. I don't want to use this volume for storing my data, right? So how do I get a new volume? So let me come back to here again and see that the instance is currently created in which availability zone. The instance is currently in 1D availability zone. So go to the volume section, click on create a volume, select the volume type that you wanted to, select the size, and maybe I'll go with no, I will go with like 4 GB, right? And you can see that the maximum size of the volume that you can create here, and let it be the IOPS default, right? Let it be the throughput, that is basically the performance, like how much total MB of the data can be written to the disk per second duration. That's how it is. Availability zone should be 1D because the volume and the instance must be in the same zone. Forget about the remaining options, whatever you see here for now, and create a volume. Once the volume is created, select the volume, and for now the volume is showing that creating state. Let me refresh. You see the volume is currently in available state. That means the volume is there, but I'm not started using this volume on my EC2 instances. Here I would like to call out one statement. The moment when you get a volume, you should start paying to AWS. No matter whether you are really using the volume in your server or not, the moment volume is allocated for you, start paying. That means the EBS volumes are not a pay as you go services. Are we good with this statement? Right? So that means though you are not using the volume to store your data, the moment when you take the volume, you have to pay it because AWS already reserving this particular hard drive capacity from their AWS data center side. Right? So now go to the actions, click on attach the volume. Here select the EC2 instance from the drop down, right? And you see the device name. So it is asking you that, hey, tell me the name of the device that you wanted to give. Usually by default it will take the name, but if you want to give your own name, you see that these are the different names that it will be supported. And we got some things here as well here, right? So you can give the name start from SDF to SDP, right? So let it be the default name. I don't need to worry. Just go and attach the volume. Now come back to your EC2 instance and run lsblk. Now you could see that the 4 GB of volume is available. The name of the volume is XVDF. If you go back to the AWS one more time and look for your EC2 instance, refresh the EC2 instance and look at the storage section. You see that there are two volumes that are currently attached to this instance. The 4 GB size of the volume name is /dev/sdf. If you come to your OS level, the name is showing as XVDF. In the AWS, the name is showing as SDF. Both are same, guys. SDF is the name at AWS side of world, XVDF is the name at Linux side of world, but both are same. Just a name, kind of aliasing, guys. Okay. Usually one disk can have multiple names. It's kind of aliasing. So if you look into the dev location and do a ls-l one more time, you see that I got a XVDF here. If you do little scroll up, somewhere you must be having this. You see this? SDF name is actually having the link to the XVDF name. That is describing that these two names are same. We don't need to too much worry about why all this doing, right? Just to avoid the confusion, why SDF in AWS side, why XVDF in the Linux side. I'm just showing this, right? It will all set up automatically for you. So just use whatever the name that you get it here. In my case, my disk is /dev/xvdf. This is the disk name that I wanted to use to store my data. Good. Now, so how to store the data in this disk, right? Data in the sense what? Let's say I wanted to run my website, right? The website related images, content, all this stuff, code, everything now I wanted to keep in this particular disk. That is my goal. Now let's see how to use this volume to store the data. So I have some presentation here to talk about the way how it is working. And as I see a question in the chat window, right? I don't see a volume that is starting with the L character, guys. Nowhere. Okay. Let me come back to my presentation. You see that this is my volume, right? Let's say whenever you get a volume, right, with any name, it could be SDF or SDC, whatever, right? So by default, the volume that you get it is called as a raw volume. When I say a raw volume, that is just a hard disk for you, and it is not yet formatted to be compatible to store the data. In the sense, now I cannot store any data in this volume directly because the volume is not ready, not compatible for storing the data. So once you get a raw volume, in order to store the data in the volume has to be formatted. Whenever I use the terminology called formatted, means that your volume will be get divided it into multiple blocks. Let's say if your volume size is 100 GB, then this entire 100 GB space is divided it into number of blocks. Each block will have its own size. Could be 128 KB or could be 64 KB, could be different. Some size will be calculated based on the size of the volume, some default block size. So it will be dividing your whole 100 GB space into multiple blocks and some block size, right? So why it has to do like this? Because when it is trying to store some data in this volume, right? This is like 100 GB volume, big one. So it should know some structuring, right? So that's the reason it has to divide it into multiple blocks. Once your raw volume is formatted and the structure got created there, then that volume is called as a file system. File system is the terminology that we use here. What is file system? If you ask me, right? The file system means if the volume is formatted and got the structure ready, or in a way, if your volume is formatted to store the data in the directory hierarchical format, then that is called as a file system. Why I am using the terminology called directory hierarchical pattern? Tell me guys one thing, because we already know some basics of the Linux. How did you store the data in the Linux system so far? We already did it, right? Without knowing or without worrying about the EBS volume, so far from the day one, I have stored a lot of data in my EC2 instance, right? Isn't it? Like creating a F1 file and VA into the F1 file and put some data. What does it mean, guys? I'm actually storing some data in my file. My file is in directory, the directory in a parent directory, correct? That means in the Linux system, if you wanted to store any data, right, you have to follow the directory hierarchical fashion, the parent and child directory relationship, right? We need to follow that structure. That's a standard method. So formatting this volume will now be compatible to store the data in the directory hierarchical fashion. That's the reason if you ask me what is the definition for file system is the way to store the data in the directory hierarchical fashion. Converting your raw volume into that particular compatibility is called as a file system. So now my file system is created, correct? The moment when you format the volume, I will say that the file system is created, right? When I say file system is created, the device is divided into the blocks, structure is created, and it is now ready to start storing the data. Now, how do I keep the data in this volume? So far we know that we can store the data into the file. The file can be in a directory, the directory can be in another parent directory. That is what we know, right? We didn't know that we can keep the data directly into the volume. So even now, whichever the volume that is now formatted to a file system, this volume has to be attached to a directory. Like in which directory you wanted to create a file, right? Take one directory and that directory now to be attached to this particular disk. If then now onwards, any file or any directory that you are creating under this directory, that data will go to this particular volume only. That means from user perspective, you are still creating a data in a file, you are keeping the file in a directory only. That is not changing. What is changing? I'm attaching a directory to the volume, then in the back end, it is taken care of storing that data into the corresponding volume where my directory got attached or mounted. Mounting is a technical terminology here. That means once my volume is created as a file system, I need to mount one directory and then start using that directory to store your data that eventually go to the same volume only. We'll quickly do this in a practical, right? So the step number one is whichever the volume that you have got it, you need to mount it, right? So if you run this command will tell you whether this volume is formatted or not. Got me? If you are getting this type of response, that means this volume is a raw volume. This is not yet formatted as a file system. I'm just checking whether this is formatted or not formatted, right? This is the command to check. Okay, this is the raw volume which is not formatted yet. Now let me format this. mkfs is the command to make a file system, right? -t is the type of the file system that you wanted to, and specify the volume name. When you are formatting the volume, right, or dividing your volume it into number of blocks, it can be done in a different ways or the different types. Your volume can be formatted using the type called ext3, can be formatted using ext2, can be formatted using ext4, can be formatted using xfs, so on so on. It's up to your convenience which type that you wanted to use to format, but any format that you use, the overall concept is same, right? We are not worrying about the differences between each and every type at this moment, not needed as well. Just think that any type is fine, not a worry. Basically, how much big size of the file can be created, what will be the block size after the format, those some technical differences will be there behind the screen, but don't worry. You don't need to know all of these because we are not working at this layer once we get into the upcoming lectures. For now, I'm just using ext4 type to format this volume. Now let me hit enter. Now you can see that it is actually creating a file system as part of these, and it is creating the blocks, right? And you can see like total, I think this many number of blocks are created, something like this. Let me clear the screen. Something is done, like the format is done, some structure is created. Now this volume is called as a file system. So let me verify that using file command one more time. Now you see the output response. It is telling that this particular volume is now formatted as a ext4 file system. This is how you get output if it is already a file system. Let me clear the screen. Now you take a directory in which directory you wanted to store the data and mount the directory into the volume. So you can create whichever the directory that you like it. For example, mkdir/data. You create one directory and you mount this directory on that volume. Mount /dev/xvdf. I believe that is the name of the volume. Then /data. Now df is the command to see the volumes that are mounted. Don't worry about the whole output that you see here. Just focus on the last line. The last line is telling that the xvdf is the volume which is around 4 GB in size. You can't see 4 directly, guys, because some space will be used for internal purpose. That's the reason you are getting only 3.9 GB, right? This is the total size of your volume. In that, right, this volume is currently mounted on /data directory, right? And you see that the used currently in this volume 24K is stored. That is again some internal data, not our data. And this is the free space, and total 1% is used total so far. This is like the file system metrics that I would say. Now, if you wanted to store the data in the xvdf volume, where do I need to store the data, guys? I will never ever store the data into xvdf directly. Rather, you always store the data in the corresponding mounted directory that will go into this particular volume. So if I want to store the data into xvdf, I will go to /data directory. That's it. Now you start creating your files. You see, I just have created a f1 file. Now you go to this f1 file and put some content. Right? Now, whatever the content that you kept in, whatever the file that you created, that is actually storing in the xvdf volume, not on the xvda volume. Are we good with this? Now a question for you guys, right? In the XVDF, how much data that I can store, right? So I can store close to 4 GB, not exactly 4, but close to 4 GB. That's the total size of the volume. Can I say that after the mounting process, the XVDF volume is referring as slash data, correct? Both are same kind of, right? Or maybe my question like this: how much data that I can store under the slash data directory, right? Under the slash data directory, in this directory, I can store 4 GB of data, of course, like whatever you see here. That means the slash data is now accommodating the data which is equivalent to the volume capacity. Because I can't use this volume directly to store the data, and I'm just using the directory as a reference point, as a entry door, as a mount point to access my volume. So always to access the volume, you go via this slash data file system. So now rather me calling XVDF as a file system, I can call the slash data itself is a file system. Can I do that? Can I call slash data directory as a file system? Yes. Slash data is a directory, that's true, but this is a special directory which is actually mounted on a specific drive. So whenever a directory is mounted on a drive, that directory is called as a file system. So here slash data is the file system. Inside the slash data file system, now you can start putting any data. Now my terminology is like this. The F1 file, F5 file, and the directory 2, all these are actually created under the slash data file system. Are we good with this statement? Right? All this content, whatever I created under the slash data file system, those are actually getting stored in the XVDF volume only, because slash data is actually referencing to this particular volume because I have mounted that way. Without a mount point, without a directory being mounted on the volume, you can't use this volume for doing any read or write operations. It is possible to unmount as well. You see this? The umount command is the one to unmount it. Of course, now it is showing that the slash data is busy. Why? Because I'm currently inside the slash data. So you can come out from the slash data to somewhere else. Now you run umount command. Now you can't see that entry at all in the df command. You see that entry is gone. So df command, the disk file system, show me the output in the human readable format. The df command will show you the file systems which are currently in the mounted state. If it is unmounted, you can't see them in this output. Now tell me guys, how can I store the data in the XVDF? Can I store the data in the XVDF now? I can't. Or can I read the data? Like sometime back I created a file called F1, right? Can I see that file here? I will go to cd slash data. Sometime back I created a file in the slash data only, right? Correct? Sometime back I created a file in slash data only. Now I'm inside the slash data. Now if I see the content in slash data, nothing is there. Why? The content that was created under the slash data sometime back, that data was actually stored in the corresponding mounted volume. Now it is unmounted. Now you can't see the data. A question for you at this time. Can I call /data as a file system? No, it is not a file system now, because this is not mounted on the volume, right? At this time, you see the df command, it is not mounted. When it is not mounted, the /data is just a simple normal directory. This is not a file system anymore. Mount /dev/xvdf space /data df. Now, can I call /data as a file system? Yes. Why? This is actually mounted on the volume, referencing to one volume. Now, if I go to /data directory, I'm able to see my data as well. You see the data? This data was not appearing some time back. You see this? Why it is coming now? Right? So because this is now mounted on XVDF. So from the user perspective, the F1, F5, dir2, all these are actually stored under the /data directory. But from the Linux concept perspective, the F1, F5, directory 2, all these are actually stored in the XVDF volume. Yes or no? It's kind of, probably I'll go here. Okay, let's say this is my house. I don't want this bigger thing. It's kind of, let's say this is my house, right? And now for my house, to access my house, I need a door, right? I just need a entry door, correct? So what I do is I'll make a door here. I'll go inside or this door and I'll put some content inside. I'll put my things. Okay, I'll put my things, something like this. After some time, right? So I'm just closing my door. I'm just closing my door. Where is my content, guys? My content is inside only. Only thing is, once it is closed, I can't access. I can't put new data. I can't read the existing data. But the content is still there in the house itself, right? I'm giving the outside of the technical example anyway. Whenever you wanted to use the data which is there in the house, again, what you need to do? Again, you open the door and go inside, start accessing the data, correct? Same thing is happening here as well. Sometime back, I have accessed the volume using this /data as a entry door. I went inside and kept the data. The data is safely there in the XVDF. The moment when you unmounted, the /data door is taken out. Your data is still there in XVDF only. I can use the data whenever you again mount it or open the door, something like this. Let me show you something now. I'm taking one more directory, guys. Let's say mkdir slash AWS or slash web data, some directory. Now, if you see my slash web directory, it's empty, right? Obviously. What is the data in my /data? I have F1, F5 directory 2. What is the current status? The XVDF volume is mounted on /data. Are we good with this information? Now what I do is I will run unmount command. Now what I do is I will run mount /dev/xvdf/web. Now tell me guys, what will be the content in /web directory? What will be the content in /data directory? This scenario should help you to understand what's happening. Sometime back, the F1, F5, dir2, this data is actually there in the /data directory, but now the same data is appearing in the /web directory. Why? Because we are not actually keeping the data in the directory. Rather, we are keeping this data in the corresponding volume where it got mounted. Sometime back, this volume got mounted in the /data and I was able to access the data using /data. Now this volume is mounted as /web and now I'm able to access the same data using this /web as a door to go and get the volume data from the volume. Make sense? Like if you change the door, do you think your data will get changed, guys? No, right? Let's say you remove this door and you put a new door there. Maybe I'll put a door here, just example. Nothing will change. Your entry point got changed, but your data still be the same, but the way how you are accessing the data is different. Same thing is happening here as well, right? My mount point got changed to the volume, but your data should not be changing. It is still referencing to the same volume, same data. That's how it works. Df command will show you the metrics of your file systems only when it is in a mounted state. Any reason, guys, for that? Why the df is showing only when it is mounted? Mounted state is mean that your volume is like open. Then only your command also can go to the volume, can calculate total size, can calculate total how much space, how much data stored, how much is left over, free space. It can do all these calculations, right? And then it is showing the data. When it is unmounted, no one can use your volume, right? And how it can go and calculate the total size and how much is stored. That's the reason the df will not show if it is in unmounted state. Same thing, like if your house is close and if I ask you, hey, can you tell me total how many things inside? Can you tell me that? No, right? You don't have access to go inside and you can't determine the characteristics of that. Correct? Same thing is happening here as well. So when you unmounted, you can't see all that sizes and all because it can't get the data from your volume. It is currently not accessible. And you cannot access the volume when it is in unmounted state. No way, right? So if you want to use the volume, mount it, right? If it is unmounted, you can't see the characteristics, you can't put the data, you can't retrieve the data, nothing can be done. Now, can I use the statement at this time? So whenever I'm keeping some data in the volume, the data can be accessible only if the volume is in mounted state, correct? If that is the case, right? So your volume should be in mounted state always, then only I can start accessing the data. If it is not mounted, I can't access. So the question here is, for any reason, let's say my instance gets rebooted. You see, right? My instance is now rebooted. It will go shut down and it will start again. Obviously, your session is disconnected because server is going for reboot. Let me try to log in again. I'm implementing all these scenarios to understand the things. It may take some time. But how do you know, guys, the reboot is completed or not, the server is ready or not? Got me? Like if you are rebooting your laptop, let's say, you will know, right, when the laptop will be ready. You will get a login prompt, correct? Once you get a login prompt in your laptop, then you know that your laptop is properly came up and you log into the instance, your laptop. But here your EC2 instance is actually rebooted in the US East 1 region in the AWS data centers. You can't see that, right? So to know the current status of your instance, maybe I'm switching to a different concept because we got that scenario. I wanted to show you that if you wanted to know the current status of this server, select the server, go to actions, go to monitor and troubleshoot, and here you can see something called get instance screenshot. You see here, if you are able to see the login, that means your server is rebooted properly. This is actually a actual screen that is appearing on the data center side. Like if you go to the data center and you stand in front of the server and you reboot the server, you will see all the progress in the screen, right? That is the screen that I'm seeing here. Here, if you are able to see login, that means the server is rebooted properly. If the server is not rebooted, it is still doing something, we'll see the status here, guys. Good. Cancel. So let me try now. You see it is working. The thing is, right, you see that the time of the reboot my file system was mounted, but after the reboot the file system is not mounted. That means your volume is not set to mount automatically after the reboot, which is not a good sign. Why? If the server gets rebooted, volume is not mounted, any data that is in the volume you are not using, you can't use it, right? So you need to set your file system to be mounted automatically. For that, we need to use one configuration file. The file is /etc/fstep. This is the file system configuration file. In this file, we need to mention the file system that you are expecting it to be mounted automatically. Don't do any changes to the existing lines, guys. Just go to the new line and tell that /dev/xvdf is my volume name. I want to mount it under, let's say, /web. ext4 is the type of the file system that it was used at the time of creating a file system. Mount it with some default settings and give 0 / 0. This is the line that we need to add here. Again, don't go in deeper again. What is this 0 and 0? This 0 and 0 will tell that, hey, don't check for the file system is good or not at the time of mounting. Just go and start mounting. Usually if I say 1 here, that means, hey, before mounting the file system, you verify whether the file system is good or not, the disk is corrupted or not, file system is corrupted or not, is all good or not. You just do the verification. That's what is called as a 1. If I don't want to do the verification, just go and start doing the mounting process. It will be like 0 0. like always will be going 0 0 only. So that's how we need to add a entry over there, guys. Now after the reboot, the file system will be mounted automatically without any issues. But I have to mount it now, right? XV df slash, let's say, web. In the web. Good. So if you are already using the slash web, right, and if you try to unmount, it will not work, guys. It makes sense, right? Because you are inside the file system, you are inside the volume, and if you try to close the door, you can't being inside or being used, right? So make sure that you are not using, you come out and then you unmount it. You may have some issues at the time of unmounting process. Sometimes it is keep complaining that, hey, this is already busy, cannot unmount it, right? So that's okay. Well, I think I got the right question at the right time. So if someone else are in the same file system using this, because this is a multi-user operating system, if you wanted to know who is using my file system, the best command is fuser. So run this command. This command will tell you that root user is currently using this file system as a current working directory using this particular process ID. You will get more information using this command. Either you ask this user, hey, don't use this command, this file system, I want to unmount, or you go and kill this process, like case to case basis. You see, I kicked out from this shell to my EC2 hyper user because I killed this process, right? So if we do so, whichever the user using this file system, that user will kick out from that location to back. Got me? So that's how, like, we need to ensure that we are killing the corresponding processes if you are getting that kind of the errors. Good with that? Just to add one more thing here, or before that, okay, let me bring up my website, guys. Okay, so ls-ld slash var slash www slash html. This folder will not be there initially, right? Once you install the httpd web application, then as part of the installation process, it actually creates all the required folders. You see, after the installation, you should be able to see the directory, right? And this directory is empty now. Good. So systemctl start httpd, right? What is the reason why I'm discussing about the entire EBS volumes, guys? The website related data that I wanted to keep in my EC2 server, that I wanted to keep in my specific volume, not on the root volume, right? Now tell me, guys, how do I start using this volume? Let's say now I wanted to keep my website related data in the XVDF volume. What is that I need to do? Mount. Sorry, first I need to unmount it, because one volume cannot be mounted on two different directories at the same time, right? You unmount it from there. Mount slash dev slash xvdf. Now I'm mounting it into var www html. Are we good with this command? Of course, I'm mounting into HTML directory only, but I need to give the absolute path, right? The directory is in www, it is in where, it is in slash. I'm just giving the complete path. Now, whatever the data that you keep in the var www HTML, that data is actually storing in my xvdf volume. So keep your images, content, code, anything in this location that actually go with your specific volume. That's how I'm separating my data it into two different volumes case. OS data will go to one drive, your business data will go to into another drive. Good with that? Now, to give you additional information on this, I have the SDC disk which is like a 200 GB. This SDC disk you can use as a file system or a single file system directly, like you format the 200 GB, you mount it on one folder, or it is possible to create a partitions out of this single bigger disk. I don't want to use this entire 200 GB volume it into one single file system the way how I did it some time back. If you want to use this entire 200 GB volume into two file systems, you first divide the volume it into two different partitions. Then the partition names will become SDC1, SDC2. If you are making your volume into partitions, then use this partition as a file system. Following me? Now you see, I got two file systems. Slash dir1 is one file system, slash dir2 is another file system. Any data that you are keeping in slash dir1, that data will go to SDC2 partition. Any data that you are keeping in slash dir2, that data will go to SDC1 partition. Of course, all the data is going to same drive only, it's SDC disk only, but it's possible to make them into partition and divide that into different file systems for a different flexibility purpose. When you are making your SDC whole disk into multiple partitions, it's up to you how you wanted to decide the size partitioning. One can be 150, the other can be 50, one can be 190, the other can be 10. It's up to you how you wanted to do this separation. Or the entire 200 GB, I can make it as one single partition, 200 GB into SDC1. It's up to you how you want it to, but this is possible. You see, I can break this into like this, multiple. I can make this into 4 partitions and make it as 4 file systems, possible ways. The reason I'm telling this is if you come back to the LSBLK one more time, you see the XVDA disk. Tell me guys one thing. Even the XVDA disk, we can't use as a raw volume to store the data, right? The XVDA also should be formatted as a file system, mount it as a into one of the mount point and use the mount point to store the data, correct? The same, whatever I did it for XVDF, the same technical concepts will be applicable for XVDA also, correct? But you are not formatting, you are not mounting the XVDA because that is a root volume. As part of the EC2 launch process, right, AWS will take care of, right, creating the XVDF, sorry, creating the XVDA into a file system and mounting everything. But the AWS is not using the XVDA as a single hard drive or single file system directly. No. What they are doing? The XVDA drive is created as a partitions. You see this. XVDA1 is the partition of 8 GB. XVDA 127, something like that, is another size. XVDA 128, another size. So they made it into multiple partitions here. The XVDA1 partition is actually treated or mounted on a file system. The file system called slash x. The slash whatever you see, that is the root directory that we were talking about from the day one. From the day one I was telling that slash is the top root level directory. Under that we can see multiple, right? The top root level directory is actually a root file system. That file system is mounted on XVDA1 partition of your XVDA disk. To understand this XVDA1, I'm talking about this partitioning concept, but believe me, we will never ever do this partitioning in the real time. We'll just directly use the volume, format it, mount it, and use it. If you are using or if you are on on-premises servers, then you may see this kind of a partitioning concepts. Why I don't see this partitioning concept at least in the cloud? The reason, like, if I need a 4 GB, go to AWS and get a 4 GB volume. If you need 10 GB, go to AWS and get a 10 GB volume. If it is on premises, right, you already purchased a hard drive with 500 GB. You can't change the size whenever you want it, right? In that situation, yes, I can't do anything. Take the 500 GB volume and make it into multiple partitions, multiple file system. Maybe that is the only way to use it, right? That's the reason. So we don't need to worry about how to make the partitions, all of these at this time, right? But we just need to understand what is it mean by the XVDA1 and what is this root file system, right? So after the instance gets rebooted, right, your XVDF volume will be get mounted into slash web folder, because that is what you said in the FS tab, right? Whatever is currently mounted, that is just a temporary. After the restart, it just follows your FS tab entries. How it is defined there, it will just mount it over there. So cool, guys. I really wanted to run one small scenario, then we'll be done for today, right? Now I'm just using my official terminologies. In my Linux system, I have a root file system, right? In my Linux EC2 instance, I have a root file system. Previously, I was using the terminology called root directory. Now I am using the terminology called root file system. This root file system is currently mounted in /dev/xvda1 partition. Under this root file system, I have multiple directories, right? And I have a directory called home, right? Under this, I have a directory called, let's say, opt. Under the root file system, I have a directory called, let's say, usr. Under this root, I have one more directory called, let's say, web. I'm just taking some examples. Now let's say I have one more volume got attached to my server. The volume is /dev/xvdf. What I'm doing, right, I'm actually mounting this web directory into the xvdf, right? Now tell me guys, under this web directory, now if I start creating any files, let's say I'm creating a file called f1. This f1 file is getting stored in which volume? I got two hard disks in my server, right? Well, so you mean to say the f1 file is actually uh, in the xvdf. Let me do small thing. I'm actually unmounting this. Okay, I'm actually unmounting this. Whenever I'm using this different color, black color, that means the web is not mounted on the xvdf. This is unmounted for now. When it is in unmounted state under this web directory, because the directories exist, whether the directory is mounted or not mounted, either the case the directory is there in your server, right? Under the web directory, now I'm creating a file called f2. Now the question is, the f2 file is currently stored in which volume out of these two volumes, right? Whenever you create a f2 file, it will look for the web directory. Is it a file system at this time? Currently I'm working on a black color. No, this is not a file system because this is not mounted. Let me remove this, right? This is not mounted. Okay, then it will look for one more parent directory. Okay, the parent directory is root. Is it a file system? Yes, root is the file system. It is mounted on xvda1. So your f2 file is actually storing in the xvda1 partition. Like eventually it will be like xvda disk. That is how it decides your files has to be stored in which volumes out of multiple volumes that are available, based on which is actually acting as a file system by the time. Now tell me guys, at this time, if I run cd/mnt and ls-cell, what will be your expected output? It will be f2 file, right? It will be f2 file because when the web is in unmounted state, I created a f2 file, right? The f2 file is referencing to the root file system. In the root file system, the f2 is there. This is f2, correct? I'm talking about the scenario to make it more even better. Now let me change the scenario. Let's say currently my web directory is mounted on xvdf. It is mounted now, okay? Now if I run the command cd/mnt and do a ls-cell, now tell me guys what will be the output of this. The output is f1. So now tell me guys, at this time the web directory is actually mounted, right? Can I access the f1 f2 file? You can't, but the file is there. The f2 file is there in the root file system, but you can't access that file just because the file was created when it was in unmounted state. Now you can't access. So now you can access only either one of the file. Either you access f2 file or the f1 file. When it is mounted, you get f1. When it is unmounted, you get f2. That's the tricky part. Technically, you will never ever use a single directory as a mounted state, as a unmounted state. We will never do that. You use the directory as a file system, mount it, or you don't mount it and use as a normal directory. But I'm talking about this scenario so that you will get a better picture or better clarity how the things will work. But in real time, we will never use one directory as a file system or not, right? Because you can't access the both files at the same time, right? The question that I see in the chat window, whenever you are not mounting into the directory, then this web directory itself will be storing in the root file system. So the directory will still be there, whether you mounted, you not mounted, it will be there, right? You see currently the web is already unmounted, right? You see the directory. This is not going anywhere, right? So the directory is still there. So when it is not mounted, the directory is pointing to the root file system. When it is mounted, it will be pointing to this particular volume. That's only the difference. Are we good with that? Well, team. So as a whole summary, right? So we can attach a additional EBS volumes to the EC2 instances, right? And that has to be formatted and mount it as a file system and use that file system to access the data on that particular volume. So by default, all the data is going to the root file system, which is the root volume. If you don't want it, you mount your volume into any one directory and start keeping the data over there only. So one last scenario again, right? Just to conclude this scenario, whenever you
Here,
have
sorry,
again,
I got a question. In your
yeah,
example, you gave /mnt, cd/mnt. I was wondering what is that /mnt? It was not under root file system.
well,
Did
what do
you
you,
mean the wave? I mean in the yeah, over here where it says cd/mnt. I don't
oh my
see the
God,
/mnt.
oh my God, oh my God, thanks for this. Oh my
That's
God,
why I was questioning where is that should be wave, right? Yeah.
sorry,
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
sorry, and thanks for correcting it, right? So yeah, this is slash. Like the reason, right? Sorry. So possibly I might have used the MNT directory to discuss this topic in my previous lecture, and I just went through the flow. Hope this is good now, right? Whoever is having some confusion. So this is not MNT, this is web, guys. Thanks for that, right? Thanks for correcting this. Now, one last thing, right? Once you created a volume of some capacity, let's say 4 GB, later you decided that no, I need a more capacity, right? It is possible to increase the volume size by selecting the volume, go to actions, modify the volume and specify the new size over there. When you are modifying the volume, you cannot decrease the volume size. The volume can only be increased, cannot be decreased. Why? Definitely. If it is decreasing, right, so there will be chances of the data loss because already some data will be there. So you can increase it from 4 to 8. Let's say I'm increasing the volume size to 8 GB and just click on modify. AWS will now so once the volume is extended with the new size, whatever you wanted to, just come back to your Linux. Sorry, right? Yeah, it is already done. You see this XVDF, it was 4 GB, now it is showing 8 GB. If we come to AWS side, you see that it is increased to 8 GB. Now, if you do a df-h command, this is important to know that, yes, the volume is actually increased to 8 GB, but your file system is still referencing that it is 4 GB. The only reason is any space that you get it from AWS is the raw space that you can't use directly, right? It has to be formatted, correct? When you format it, then only that will be ready to start storing the data when it is structure is there. So the additional 4 GB space, whatever you got it, that is not at ready for storing the data. Hence, it is not appearing in the file system format. Being said that, now tell me guys, how much data that I can keep in my XVDF at this time? Close to 4 GB only. Though the volume is 8 GB, but still I can store, yeah, as per this numbers, 3.7 is the availability, right? I can store 3.7 only if I go with the actual numbers, whatever is showing in the screen. To use the additional 4 GB, whatever you have got extra added, we need to format it. But if you do a MKFS, the way how I did it before, it is going to format the complete volume and the existing data will be get deleted. So you should not do a MKFS there. Rather, you need to do resize to FS command. This will ensure that the additionally added the 4 GB will be get formatted and that will be get added up to your file system. Now your file system is reflected with the new size. That's my last scenario for today. If any questions, do let me know, or else we are good for today, guys. I hope I have given you a good insightable to this concept, because this is little tricky to understand, at least for the new or the beginners. So I hope I have given the enough information. Any uh, questions, do let me know. All right, no questions. Right. So in the DNS concept, if the local DNS server, right, is not finding or not having the answer to the question that we have been asked for, then that is forwarding it to the next level DNS servers, right? It will, that's how your request will go to the domain registers, right? Whoever is registered the domain, wherever you register the domain, those guys are maintaining the name servers, right? So it will will go there and it will get the answer from there the first time, then it will store it in the local DNS server as a cache, so that the next request will not go to the main servers. It will just resolve from there itself. Not to all domain registers. Where your domain got registered, that domain registers name servers will be receiving the request, right? Yes. So maybe to give you that information, right? uh, I think who is. So who is the database which has the details of all the domains and the corresponding name servers. Let's say edshopper.com. This is a public information, guys. So if I look for the edshopper.com website, right? Uh, who is database? Right? So here I can see that the edshopper.com is actually registered with the GoDaddy. This is registered on so and so date. This is going to expire on so and so date. And you see the name servers. So it's very easy to get the name servers of each domain. So that the domain is actually registered with which name servers, right? It can get that information and it can send the request to them. So that's how your local name servers will easily know that which are the authoritative name servers to whom the request has to be sent. All this information they will know. You got me? Because the domain name servers are public information. Anyone can get to know which name servers are responsible to give the answer for the specific domain. That's how it know exactly, and it will be pointing to that particular name servers only to get answers. Right? So in this case, because I have added my AWS name servers in the GoDaddy account the other day, right? Because I wanted to manage my records in the Route 53. So because I added AWS name servers in the GoDaddy, it is now showing that the AWS name servers are responsible, right, to give you the answer. So in this scenario, any request that is hitting on edshopper.com, the request will go to AWS name servers, not GoDaddy name servers, right? But the request will be sending it to uh, uh, AWS name servers. But from the concept wise, yes, the domain is with GoDaddy. The GoDaddy is maintaining that these are the name servers that the request has to go through. That's how I'm just doing the mapping over there. Right. So as I see a question like, can we directly map from DNS to AWS? So I think the question has to be rephrased somehow, because what does it mean by DNS to AWS? Right. So usually if you look into your EC2 instance, right, select the instance, you are able to see a public IP and private IP, guys. So far I'm using the public IP only. You also use public IP only. I will talk about what is private IP, what is the purpose of the private IP in upcoming lectures. At the moment, the private IP may not work for you guys sometimes, so don't touch that. Just use the public IP for all of the operations that I have done so far. So I'll talk about private IP in later, right? So the domain, the domain can be purchased in any vendor. It can be from Route 53, sorry, it can be from AWS Route 53 or maybe GoDaddy or from any vendor, doesn't matter, right? In which vendor you have purchased a domain, that is called as a domain register, right? By default, the domain register is responsible to maintain the name server. If you don't want them, you can go and change whatever the name servers that you want it to be.
Sir, can we create volume as a part of free tier for in AWS?
Yes, the as I said, right, the free tier is limited to use only the general purpose SSD of size 30 GB, not more than 30 GB, not any other types also. Only the general purpose within 30 GB size is part of free tier.
Okay. So if we delete that, the new attached volume, like will it be considered for billing or how it works?
No, once your volume is deleted, definitely it is gone away, right? So usually one thing to note down here, when you terminate the instance, right, only the root volume will be get terminated automatically, but the volume that was attached additionally, that volume will not be deleted by default. So we have to remember and go and delete them, guys. So it takes some time. The root volume will go automatically. The additional volume I need to delete it manually here.
Okay. Thank you. Sir, reframing the question which I was mentioned in chat window. See, my question is like when we send a request to the DNS, if that mapping is not found in the DNS, then request is going to the GoDaddy, right? From in GoDaddy, when it comes to know that we have placed name servers in the AWS, so from GoDaddy again it is going back to AWS to take the name servers, and it is resolving our domain name into IP address, right? So my question is, instead of going to GoDaddy and then coming back to AWS, can we make directly to go from DNS to AWS? That was my question.
Gotcha. So here the request will not go to GoDaddy. Maybe I don't want to use GoDaddy. The request will not go to domain register and then to the AWS name servers. Okay. The request will go to AWS name servers only directly. It will not go to GoDaddy. Okay. But
Okay.
when we are explaining the concept, right, I'm using this GoDaddy or domain register. The reason, let's say I have my local DNS server. First of all, how would it know that what is the name server that it has to point, right? How it know that AWS name server?
We have mentioned it in GoDaddy.
You mentioned it in GoDaddy, but how your local DNS servers know that? To get an answer, it has to ask to whom, correct?
Yes,
So
yes.
to get that information, first it has to request the domain register. Hey, tell me where is, like, tell me which name servers are having my like the resource records.
Okay.
So first it has to ask your domain register, or at least the whois database kind of, wherever that information is available, right? So first it will ask for, hey, which name servers are being used for this. Then it will go and ask the name servers, hey, give me the answer for this. That's how it works. Or else how it know that which name servers are being used, right? Either it has to ask
Okay.
the domain register, or it has to ask
Mm.
the kind of the whois database, like whoever is maintaining the list of all the name servers of the records, right, of the domains. So someone it has to ask, right? Then it will go there.
Okay, okay, I got it. Yeah, thank you.
But from the explanation perspective, usually we say that, hey, the request will go to local DNS servers and then it will go to the authoritative name servers. That's how we use that statement. But before it is going to authoritative name servers, it should know, right, who is them. So it will get that information from the domain registers or someone who is giving that. Then it will go there. Cool stuff. So that's the story, guys. I think I have updated the admin to let you know the holidays for the next couple of days. Maybe one for 25th, one for Jan 1st, kind of. You will get the proper message sometime today, guys. Right. So have a nice day. I'll be sharing you one beautiful assignment and the tracker as well. So I'm just waiting for the list of all of your names to mention it in the tracker. I'll try to complete it today or tomorrow. I'll share the details. All right.